For decades, hundreds of thousands of women were forced to give up their babies for adoption, simply because they were unmarried. But for the children who didn't have white skin, there was an additional cruelty. ITV News has uncovered shocking stories of racism against babies just weeks old who faced prejudice because of the colour of their skin. From being labelled unadoptable, a poor specimen, or just referred to as it. We've spoken to adults about the abuse they endured throughout their childhood. Now they want their suffering to be acknowledged by the church and the government. And a warning, this report from our social affairs correspondent Sarah Corker contains racist language that some of you may well find offensive.
I love this shot. This is me when I was a little baby at Rosemundy.
From the moment he was born, Phil Frampton's care records show he was treated with prejudice and discrimination because of the colour of his skin.
I was 10 days old when they wrote in this report, and it said, full name of candidate, Frampton, Philip Roy. Ever had fits or measles? No. Diphtheria? No. Immunised? No. Any other physical defects or maladies? Half caste.
Despite having no disabilities, Phil was sent to a home for disabled children and then moved between orphanages. His files show he was deemed unadoptable by the state.
When I'm 1 year old, the matron says, Philip is such a poor specimen of humanity, and there are doubts about my intelligence. The reason I wasn't adopted or fostered was because I was not white.
Phil was born in a Church of England run home for unmarried mothers in Cornwall in 1953, a place where single women were forced to have their babies adopted.
So they'd be placed in there and left in that room, locked in the room, so they could watch their baby being taken away.
His mother was one of an estimated 250,000 women whose babies were taken in the 1950s, 60s and 70s, simply because they were unmarried. They were told their children would be better off, but the reality was often far different. Margaret had a bleak start to life.
One of the things on it that really hurt me, it said, it can hear. I was considered coloured. Coloured was the phrase then. And I wasn't considered correct for adoption through the home.
What impact would you say this has had throughout your life?
I say I carry a hole in my soul with it. You're marked, you carry that stigma.
Carmen was born in an unmarried mother's home in Cumbria in the 60s. Her records show her mother was led to believe she'd be adopted almost immediately. That was a lie.
You probably know that the child is very dark and that the chances of adoption are almost negligible. It shows that I was thought of as a problem, and they knew that I would very likely spend a long, long time in an institution.
So racism from the start, really?
Absolutely.
She was eventually adopted as a toddler, but after years in an orphanage. Our analysis of government archives, newspaper clippings and journals from the 1960s show racism was widespread throughout the adoption system. One study describes the improbability of adoption for non-white children, concluding it presents a fairly serious problem in a few areas. While newspaper articles from Home Office archives detail how children were not placed for adoptions because their skins look different, describing the babies as the new faces in the children's homes of Britain, the faces which don't fit outside.
The assumption was black children could not be adopted. I was unhappy for the suffering that I saw. To be honest, I was part of that society.
June was a childcare officer in the 60s and 70s in Oxford and London and recalls some of the abhorrent practices.
Others in the nursery, for instance, when they were considering whether this particular child on my caseload could be placed for adoption, and they have white adopters, and the nursery staff would look at and say, well, you have to look at the fingernails. Some of the mixed-race children were brought up to pass for white, basically.
There is growing pressure on both the church and the state, who played central roles in this cruel system, to formally apologise.
This is recent. This is part in people's memory. It's in my living memory. And when people say, "Oh, you should move on," why? What from? Yeah, it's my life.
Those who experience racism at every turn say the authorities responsible must support survivors and finally acknowledge the deep harm caused.
Well, Sarah's in our Leeds newsroom tonight. It's such a shocking report, Sarah. What's been the response from government and indeed the authorities to your investigation?
Well, some important context here, Mary. The Church of England ran more than 100 of these mother and baby institutions, as well as 30 adoption agencies. Now, in response to our report, the Church said it condemned any instances of racism as abhorrent and said it has no place in the life of the Church. Now, it's also working closely with survivors to try and fully understand the scale of its involvement, and that also includes a full apology which could come as soon as this summer. Now, that will only further increase pressure on the government to do the same. Now, a spokesperson said today that this abhorrent practice should never have happened, and it is taking this issue very seriously. And why is this important now, all these decades on? Well, we've got to remember that survivors are still suffering, they're still traumatised, they're still in pain, and they're still waiting for any form of proper support. And some have already died waiting for that.